So yeah, as I said, our talk's about front end to full stack with serverless. Something that's not talked about a lot whenever we get the serverless talks is focused on back end, on data, observability. Not a lot of focus on front end. So that's what we're going to chat about today. So speakers, who are we? Conor will introduce himself later in the talk whenever it gets to his section. I'm David Kelly. I'm a principal software engineer at EverQuote. I've been tech lead / architect on the consumer engineering team for around 3 years now. Consumer engineering basically means we own all the websites within EverQuote. And who are EverQuote, just in case you haven't heard of us. So we're the largest online insurance marketplace in the US. So when people ask me what I do or whatever EverQuote is kind of relevant to the UK, I always just say compare the market, go compare confused.com. Quite similar. I think the first screenshot here tells it quite well. You construct your profile, you give us some information about yourself, your home, your car, whatever you want to insure. We will compare insurance providers, match you with the right one, and then connect you either over the phone or online to get a policy. Sounds very simple. I've just oversimplified a really complicated industry, but that's the gist. So our presentation today is kind of split up into two parts. I'll set the scene. I'll basically tell you how we kicked off our serverless journey and what we did at the beginning, and then Conor will take over. He'll run through some architecture, some results, and some really good takeaways at the end. Right, make sure to point it there. Okay, so to go back to the very beginning of our serverless journey, it really does go back 3 years to whenever I joined the company. So at that point, the company's doing really, really well. We're in rapid growth. All of our charts are up and to the right. And the focus at that point was really to maximize that growth. And to maximize that growth on the consumer team and on the sites was all about CRO. CRO is conversion rate optimization. So for anyone that doesn't know what that is, essentially running lots of tests, A/B tests on your site to maximize the amount of traffic you get into the site. Then when you get traffic in, to get as many of them through the funnel as possible. And ultimately to bring out as much money as you possibly can. So that was the main focus. At that point, we had 4 teams, probably around 16 engineers at one point, working into one application, all contributing these A/B tests, which are basically big if statements, into one code base. So you can kind of imagine where I'm going with that. But skipping on probably almost a year, Conor joins us by that point. And the CRO testing has been deprioritized a bit. We're focused on other initiatives. And we have just a Belfast team. We're pretty much all new to the company now, looking after this application, which we recently had 16 people all going mad at. And we also had other smaller projects that we're working on. And those smaller projects allowed us to do some experimentation with serverless. So both myself and Conor brought some experience of serverless over from our previous job. So we're able to kind of start experimenting with that. Then in December, I haven't got it here for like a jump scare or to bring back flashbacks for anyone. Log4j happened. And the reason I have included that in here, it was kind of a big turning point, I think, for us, or a big milestone where people kind of realized maybe these guys are onto something with this serverless thing. So what I mean by that is when people were scurrying, wondering, are our Java apps okay? What do we need to do? What do we need to update? Where we were using Lambda, we knew that, okay, Lambda have security patches for us. They've emailed us, they've contacted us, they've let us know. We feel good. There's some things we still need to do, but we're not scurrying. Same with if people are using managed Kafka clusters, we're using EventBridge. We already know that we're unaffected. Like they've told us straight away. So a lot of people, I think, probably a bit jealous. We're sitting almost with the feet up while they're on bridge calls. And see Dave Brainard over there nodding away. He was on most of those calls. So that was a big milestone where people, we kind of changed some thoughts of other people around the company. So kind of based off that first point, what was the problem we're going to talk about today? And that application that I mentioned where we had 16 people all pushing code into it at the one time, as you can imagine, got pretty complex. A lot of code in there, it got pretty big. It got a bit outdated. The main focus was on pushing code, pushing value in there, less on updating and maintenance. And it got slow for anyone who's worked on front-end applications before. You kind of know the larger your bundle size, the more code you've got in there, the longer it's going to take to load whenever it gets to the client, which means longer load times and then a knock-on effect to the business. Because the whole point of the CRO tests were to maximize conversion. But now we have a leak in the back because our site is slow, so we're losing conversion because of that. Studies have shown that every 1 second of load time on your screen can be up to 10% in conversion, especially on landing. We're going to show numbers almost pretty similar to that later. Spoiler alert. Probably even more impactful for me is the problem with the engineers. So as you can imagine, coming in new to an application is daunting enough. Coming into one where there's a lot of code in there, there's a lot of unused code, there's a lot of different coding standards for different teams have been pushing code into here. It's not really something that you look forward to developing in. It's not something you look forward to every time you have a ticket on the board to push a new feature in. So that drops morale. And when you drop morale, whenever you have low confidence in an application like that, people feared even making changes. So no one wanted to push to production. And as an organization, we want to achieve engineering excellence. We want to push to production multiple times a day. We don't want people afraid to push to production, maybe doing it once a week, once a month. That's kind of the opposite direction we want to go. And again, has the knock-on effect to the business. We've got slow time to market because we're not pushing any changes, which means you have a high cost per feature. Okay, back to the timeline. So at this point, we realized we've got a problem. What are we going to do about it? So in June 22, we started putting together a business case. And it was for both engineering and business leadership. Engineering part was, okay, we want to do this in serverless. Let's put together our architecture. Let's get our data together to show why we think this will work. And for business, it was, okay, here's the problem. Gathered our data to show we actually think there's a business opportunity in here, specifically to conversion. It's not just about the tech. We got a prototype together to build a bit of hype to kind of show this is the type of thing we could be doing, and this is the speed we can do it in. And then we got a roadmap together. We planned. We had distinct intervals where we were going to release. People knew when things were coming, when they were due, and it was all laid out there on paper. Then in February, we started our build. And only a few months later, in May of this year, we launched. So 4 months maybe. We launched at 1% of traffic. Until now, we're still incrementally cutting over some new features. But that's pretty staggering, I think, between February and May, being able to launch an application. Okay, so the next slide is why we're here, the serverless bit. And there's kind of a theme of putting up questions that I think are probably unanswerable. We had one in the last talk as well. But for me, whenever you start a new journey of any new tech, whether it's serverless or anything, you always ask what? What are we doing? What is serverless? I think the reason why it's not the right question for serverless is because everyone in this room might have a different answer. It depends on your environment. It depends on that environment could be anything from the project you're working on, your team. It can be as big as the organization, or it could even just be the industry you're working in. Can all dictate what your environment is. So the more important thing is to apply a serverless mindset to that environment and see what the outcome is. And usually, for me, the outcome is some sort of serverless pattern. So that leads me into what was our environment? Why did serverless make sense for us? For anyone that's worked in InsurTech or the insurance industry, you'll probably know that traffic can be inconsistent. It's pretty seasonal, especially if you work in things like health insurance. We have enrollment periods. Your traffic isn't really that predictable. We have an example here of 1 month of our traffic. And while it might be predictable at times, like low traffic at weekends, you can see where we have some weekdays where traffic is probably almost double other weeks. And another reason for that is we have a separate marketing team that works completely independent of us. And they'll launch pretty aggressive marketing campaigns. They really can't afford to wait on us saying, okay, hold on, we'll scale this up and then you can launch your campaign because we're just burning money while we're waiting on that to happen. The second thing was, at the time, we had a small team. We had a team of 4 or 5 whenever we started putting this plan together. So the main focus with a small team was ramping people up. It was focusing on delivering business value rather than focusing on maintenance, rather than focusing on upgrades and patches. We wanted to focus as much on business value as we can. And speaking of, we had a business that didn't really understand tech, and that's not putting the business down or saying anything negative about the business. I think a lot of stakeholders are probably the same, but it's more that the business's main focus is on business value. How can we deliver them business value? How can they get it fast? How can they get it most efficiently? They don't really understand why we always need to perform our cluster upgrades, why all this tech debt is important, why we need to do security patches, DB upgrades. So the closer that we can align our thinking to the business, the better that is for the company in general, for delivering business value. And of course, serverless doesn't get us the whole way. It doesn't eliminate tech debt completely, but it bridges that gap massively, in my opinion, and it's something that we've found out during this journey. And finally, an innovative culture within the company. So this is helpful on 2 fronts. One, whenever I was coming up with a plan for the architecture, when I was putting that together, when I was reviewing it with the CTO and the architecture team, I knew that would be embraced. They're embracing the innovation. They're embracing us trying something new. And on the other side, with the engineers, it wasn't a fight or an argument to say we're going to try something new here. There's a serverless thing, even though none of them had worked on it before. It's completely new, because the innovative culture is kind of built in there, and the creative culture, it was kind of the opposite. It's like, okay, bring it on. Yeah, I want to do this, which is really helpful whenever you're starting into a big project like this. Okay, there you go. The Passover.
Okay. All right, you can hear me okay? Yeah, so I just thought I'd start off. This is a slide of, I can't say the EverQuote CTO because he's over there. So I'll just say this is EverQuote engineering leadership a couple of years ago before drinking several pints of Google Kool-Aid. Okay, DK's already talked about serverless mindset. What does that actually mean? So I've got a couple of questions up here for, does serverless make testing easier, deployments faster, code quality, application performance? For me, I'd probably say, I could answer yes to those questions because I've fairly experienced with serverless. But there's a lot of people in this room that could answer no to these, and their opinion on that is completely valid because these aren't the questions you're trying to answer. So what is it for us? So there's 3 big things for us. So it's focused on value. So if it's not important for delivering value, you outsource it, right? No time spent doing cluster upgrades or managing Kafka clusters. So the big problem that serverless is trying to solve is a lack of focus on value. So because of that, whenever you think about things like managed services and Lambda, they are not the solution. They are a result of the solution that is focusing on value. And the theme of this is building resilient applications. So everything we do is event-driven and async where possible. We have a decoupled architecture. Everything scales horizontally, and we can stay flexible and be very, very resilient and scale very easily. Okay, state of serverless and front end. So like DK said, there's a lot of innovation in the serverless world, a lot to do. Lambda got really big, serverless compute, and then there's managed services. There's no-code serverless solutions, low-code serverless solutions. And a lot of that is focused on back-end data. There's not a lot in the space of front-end. There are tools like WordPress. There are platforms like Vercel, but they're not always fit for service. They are serverless. They're about speed to market. They're about buy, not build, and they do reduce your operational overhead. But they do introduce complexities versus AWS managed services. If you work for a small company or a company that's very tight in security like us, you're going to be farting about a lot with security, issues around data. Where's the data going? Where's it being stored? And there's also just legal implications. They're probably the ones that have to pay the bill and set up all the contracts. So that's at odds with our focus on delivery. We want to deliver value. We don't want to be farting about wasting time. So we had a bit of a replatform roadmap. Like DK was saying, we knew for a while that this would be coming, maybe 3 years ago at this point. So we did use a lot of smaller projects as learning opportunities. We rebuilt EverQuote.com, which was our just a standard site. We don't actually sell anything on it. It's just legal pages and there for SEO and stuff like that if people Google EverQuote. So we done CloudFront, static S3, easy to build, low maintenance, low cost. but it wasn't like a proper web app. It was just all static pages. So whenever we came to another project, which we call like the referrals experience, we built that on Lambda using the serverless framework. We were using NextJS for that. We used NextJS for the majority of our front-end apps. We got all the benefits of Lambda. Anytime traffic scaled up, we didn't have to worry about anything. It was super low cost, super efficient. But the library for the serverless framework, it was a plugin, and it became unmaintained very quickly after we started using it. But we did kind of have the proof that this is something that we would like to do if the opportunity came up in the future. But we didn't at the time. So whenever it actually came to launch this, we didn't have like a solid idea for launching with Lambda. So we were just using ECS. But one night we were pretty close to release. I think we were in the last sprint before we were supposed to release our new application. And I was doom scrolling on Twitter one night, just lying in bed. And then I saw about this thing called SST, and I was like, ooh, that looks good. I just saw Lambda Next.js, and I was like, yep, set an alarm. I'll look at that the next morning. It was a way to deploy Next.js apps to Lambda. So I said to DK, like, I know we're launching, but we said if we had a good tool to deploy this, we would do it. Like, we got all the benefits before, like, let me do it. And there's a bit of like, we're supposed to re-release in next sprint, Conor. But I just said, give me to the end of the day. If I can get this into production by the end of the day, will you revisit it? And it was like, yeah, go for it. So I did. SST, essentially, it's an extension of CDK. If you've used CDK, it's all TypeScript. You can use the same constructs that you use in CDK. It's basically L3 constructs on steroids. It does like a lot more under the hood. We're using a tool called OpenNext under the hood. Essentially, it builds your Next.js front-end app, and it creates like a wrapper around it so that it can be deployed to a Lambda function. And yeah, we're using AWS and Lambda for the actual compute. So this is what the architecture looks like. If you're not familiar with CloudFront, it's essentially a content delivery network. It handles caching. You can set up different rules for each of your different routes. So we have an S3 bucket where all of our static files go. We have a server function. Any pages that are server-side rendered, which is most of them because we want like a really performant web app with good user experience. And all of our API routes also go to this server function. So that's the sort of the meat of the app. And then we also have something called an image optimization function, which essentially, so instead of going out and grabbing an image from the browser, it calls the Lambda, which goes out and gets the image and resizes it perfectly based on like parameters set to that. So very good for SEO, very good for performance, that our images are sized appropriately. And then there's some other functionality around warmers and incremental static invalidation, but I'm not going to get into that right now. So essentially, this is what it looks like in nice AWS architecture diagram. We have our CloudFront distribution. We have our Lambdas handling the compute behind that, S3 for static assets, and we have a separate CDN for our images that are shared across all our sites. So how do we talk to downstream? This is about resilient applications, and this is about how architecture or how serverless can help you as a front-end dev. We spend very little time doing like actual services on the back end. All of our API functionality is in our Next.js app. We don't worry about RESTful APIs. It's all bespoke API endpoints. Whenever we're communicating with downstream systems, we use EventBridge for most downstream services and Kinesis for our analytics platform. So you might find it weird that we're using two sort of event streams. The reason we do that is, it might seem obvious, but whenever you think about serverless and pay for what you use, how much you're paying to talk to downstream systems depends on the value of the message. So we send stuff to EventBridge that's very like less traffic, but higher value messages. So things like form submissions, landing submissions, and then Kinesis is stuff that's really like low value messages where it would be higher traffic. So if you land on a page, if you see certain things on the page, if you scroll, click things, there could be 15, 20 of those firing on every page, and that's just very high traffic, and it's very low value messages. Whenever we're updating our data stores, that's all async Lambda into DynamoDB, and we have an API gateway to retrieve all of our customer data. So what did we actually get out of it? What were the results? So this is, we ran an A/B test between the new platform and the old. This is the results on desktop. Right is the new, obviously. So we got a fairly good win on desktop, but we also got a massive win on mobile. Still a little bit of work to do, but optimizing mobile is very, very difficult. But you can see we got very, very good performance gains out of this. So yeah, we had a 7% increase in conversion rate after this AA test, and we also had a massive reduction in story complexity and cycle time. And I think that 7% increase in conversion rate is like the biggest win we've had on this team since we joined this company. So it was pretty massive. And a big thing I want to emphasize is serverless didn't do this. Serverless isn't going to solve your problems. It's not a silver bullet. You're not going to switch to it and everything magically works. But what it does too is it gives you that focus, that ability to focus on value. What are your problems? Actually solve those problems, deliver the business value. Here's the costs. This is our old at the top and new at the bottom. We had an 88% reduction in infrastructure costs, which is obviously absolutely massive. This is with equal traffic going to both apps. One thing is, I had someone explain it before, like, if you have a container and that's serving like 2 requests every second, 24/7, that seems like a lot, right? Like you could justify keeping that container up 24/7, but if every request only takes like 20 to 50 milliseconds, you're still wasting 90% uptime on that container, which is a lot. Here's the cost breakdown, since you can see it on the last slide. So our events and Lambda are basically nothing. You can't even see the S3 line. S3 costs us 2 cents a month to serve traffic to our millions of requests every day. And one thing we pulled was developer experience. We pulled the team. These are just some questions I asked, and then how did you feel this was in the old infrastructure, and how do you feel it is in the new one? There's a couple of things there, but the big one for me is how quickly can you actually deliver value? If you pick up a ticket, how much time do you need to spend farting about, and how much time can you actually be delivering something that the business wants? And you can see there's a massive improvement on that one. Okay, monitoring. Monitoring is a big thing with serverless applications, and there'll be a talk on that later. If you use any AWS service, you get good out-of-the-box metrics. You're going to get like requests, errors, and for any managed service for Lambda. But the thing is, they can be useful, but they're not the golden ticket. You need to think, what are like the key milestones? What are the data points for success and failure in your application? For us, that could be people submitting forms, people making sure that they're actually seeing ads that are connecting them with insurance companies. And those are the important things, right? And we use custom metrics to capture all that data. We send it all to CloudWatch. CloudWatch is really nice because it's AWS native. You can see it in the console, but it also plugs in really well with all your third-party apps. So if you're using New Relic or Grafana or anything like that, it'll plug into CloudWatch pretty easily. Right. So what are the takeaways? What I want you to take away from this? So deliver functionality, not applications. If you're struggling to get serverless buy-in from your company or your teams or your tech leads, focus on what functionality can I deliver with serverless rather than what applications. So if you've got a ticket coming up and it's a piece of work and you think, okay, is there a way that I can deliver this with like EventBridge and Lambda or something like that, rather than thinking like this needs to be built into our current monolith or whatever it is. Focus on value. Anytime you spend upgrading a database, configuring CPU, configuring memory, that's just wasted time. And whenever you realize that and work in serverless land for a bit, you're just like, wow, I can't believe I used to do those things. And the big thing is mess around and find out. At the end of the day, we all started somewhere. I always just say, just any engineer that comes onto my team, my big thing is just mess around and find out. Like they'll say, should I do this? Should I do that? It's like, just go for it. Like you're not going to learn how to sail a ship sitting in the harbor, right? And I really love this graph because it just shows you the more, there's a relationship between these things, and the more you mess around, the more you find out. So just dive in and go for it, and don't be afraid. So yeah, what is it all about? So hopefully you've realized by the end of this that serverless is about business value and not technology. There's this quote that's often attributed to Henry Ford, which I really like, but I think it was just made up by some guy on the internet. But I think it's a really good quote anyway. So he said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, which is a really good quote. I've used it before, but it's very often used in the context of innovation. People ask for faster horses, but really there was an underlying problem, and here's this crazy solution. But I think that there's another message about it, because people didn't want horses, but they don't want cars either. What they do want is they want to get around quickly and efficiently. And that's the mindset that you need to have whenever you're building serverless applications. People don't want lawnmowers and hoovers in the modern day. They want tidy gardens and clean rooms. And it's the same for everyone here. You all work for a business. You all work for an organization. And your organization doesn't want your underlying technology at the end of the day. They want the business value that you're going to deliver with it. Thank you very much. That's me. Yeah.